And at the beginning of it all, a streamer called Paco opens a live on his channel to celebrate his new milestone of 700,000 subscribers, and by her side, Paco presents Mousy, a YouTuber in the beauty industry. In this, she asks for the support of the crowd with her channel, as she is still at the beginning of her career. And then, Paco asks her to talk a little more about her content, and the girl summarizes her videos as makeup tips for students. In this, she presents one of her makeups on a boy, but the young man doesn't seem to enjoy this so much. New taboo thing that your friends talk about so much. But upon realizing that he is being used by them, the boy asks to at least receive a part of the monetization, so Paco asks for Hobin to say hi to his followers, but with a smile on his face. With that said, he goes back to talking to his audience and says, which will give a new PC to one of its subscribers through a raffle. And upon hearing this, Hobin immediately notices that this draw is a scam, and when leaving the recordings, Hobin tries to remove the makeup on your face in the bathroom, but the makeup just doesn't come off. In this, he wonders why he is subject to these things, and when reflecting on Paco, he notices that even this student, getting terrible grades, he really knows how to make money. And as for the newcomer Rumi, even though she has few followers, you can already make a living just with your appearance. And when thinking about all this, Hobin notices that everyone around him has excellent qualities, and as for him, the boy has nothing, because besides not being rich, he also doesn't have enough intelligence to earn money. And after managing to get all makeup, Hobin leaves the bathroom. But suddenly a boy starts kicking him, and Hobin remembers that he had told him to smile during the live, and while drinking one step, Hobin introduces us to this boy as a snapper, a cameraman and Paco's egg baba, and besides, he is also in the group of delinquents. Then Hobin glares at him angrily, and then Snaper mocks him, saying that he almost pissed himself out of fear, and Hobin soon notices that the boy, she only became Paco's camera, so she could free ride on his authority. And as for Rumi, she checks her earnings from the last live, and note that he has already earned around 30,000 yen. And upon hearing this, Hobin is amazed at how much they gained without doing anything, and then Paco tells the girl that she will need to compensate for your help in some way. And upon seeing all this success before their eyes, Hobin and Snaper decide to create a YouTube channel, and then Snaper asks. Paco also tells Paco what he needs to have to start a channel, in which he explains that minors cannot win income, so he will need his parents' account. But upon hearing this, the boy already feels that things won't work out. After all, Snaper was caught using his parents' savings without them knowing, so he wouldn't be able to use their account. So he goes to Hobin and asks if his mother is still alive, because he wants to borrow her account. And upon hearing this, Paco is surprised by his friend's question about his mother still being alive, because for him the most correct thing is ask if she hasn't already passed away. So Hobin feels that he should put a limit on the boys from now on, but he ends up doing nothing. And then he goes to the hospital to visit his mother, who, by the way, shows interest in returning home soon, but Hobin asks her to just focus on her recovery, and his mother notices her son's face all bruised up and asks if I would have gotten into a fight, but Hobin lies, saying he would never do something like that. And before leaving the hospital, he goes to the reception to pay for his mother's treatment, but upon noticing that they charged his salary for the whole week, Hobin thinks about it. After all, his classmates took 30,000 yen, only at lunchtime, and doing practically nothing. Then he starts to complain about his life, but when Bomi Choi goes to talk to him, Hobin feels that things will get better, but the girl just asks something related to work, but he is still embarrassed for having spoken to her. And although he had his 15 minutes of happiness, Paco decides to go to the restaurant to end it all. And upon seeing him, Hobin worries, as he cannot be seen at all. So Paco goes to Bomi to introduce her to his followers, and then he proposes a challenge to her, where Bomi will have to reproduce the same snack from a poster within 30 seconds, and if she doesn't make it, Bomi will have to give him her contact details. And when analyzing the snack on the poster, Hobin notes that it is practically impossible to make a snack like that in just 30 seconds, and as for the other employees, he wonders what they should do in this situation. After all, not even they have contact with the Bomi, and then Hobin makes the snack like the one on the poster and hands it to him, and then he asks Paco to leave, as he is bothering the customers. After that, he goes back to his co-workers, and you feel like you're gonna get beaten up a lot at school the next day. And upon returning home, he receives Snaper, but soon regrets it and apologizes to his mother for borrowing her account for the boy. And besides, Hobin is outraged to see Snaper making such easy money in front of him, and to make matters worse, thinks the boy is still forcing him to make his food. And when taking the noodles to Snaper, Hobin ends up unintentionally unplugging the computer from the socket and drops the hot noodles in his colleague's face. Then Snaper starts hitting the boy while cursing him, and finds himself being beaten in his own house. Hobin realizes that his life has gone very wrong, and to make things worse, Snaper claims he is to blame for his mother having cancer. And upon hearing this, Hobin gets angry and punches the boy, and soon realizes that this is the first time he has hit a punch someone. Then the two continue the fight while the camera records everything, and after Snaper leaves, Hobin notices that he ended up leaving with an even greater loss, after all his house was turned upside down. And upon realizing that money is the worst part of his life, the boy begins to regret not having having been born into a family. Rich, but as he thinks more about it, Hobin decides to let go of these thoughts and go to sleep, but while trying to preach, he feels miserable again, and the next morning, he is woken up by a call, and as he answers the phone, he hears Snaper complaining to him and asking to remove the live that ended up leaking the day before, and upon hearing this, Hobin tries to explain that the live ended as soon as he unplugged the computer from the socket, but when looking at the cable in question, Hobin discovers that he actually disconnected only the monitor cable, so Snaper follows, complaining to him, but Hobin states that he didn't post the video, and then Snaper explains that the video uploads automatically after the PC goes off, so Hobin goes to NewTube to check out the video, and soon he finds the cut of the live showing their fight, and besides, Hobin notes that the video went viral in several platforms, and this makes him even more worried, as in addition to being bullied at home, it is still exposed on the internet now, and then he decides to delete the video as soon as possible, but Hobie finds a specific comment saying that they must have. He made good money with that video, and when he did the math, Hobie noticed that he would earn approximately 1 million yen, and meanwhile, Snaper goes to class, and he is obviously fooled by the other students. In this, he sees all his effort to approach the Paco, going to the trash can, and to try to regain some of his dignity, he tries to appeal to an easy target, but when he tries to mock one of the students, he gets his change right away, and while he gets it, Snaper accepts his fate as a joke, and meanwhile, Hobie goes to the hospital to get the bill for that week, and is shocked to discover that he will have to pay 120,000 yen. However, he manages to save the bill. After all, his video with Snaper is still making him a lot of money, and so, talking about the boy, he goes to Hobie to complain about his situation at school, because now he has become a joke for everyone, and then he asks the boy to give him at least half the money. After all, he also has the right, so Hobie hits him with kicks it in the nuts, and claims that Snaper deserves to go through all of this. And besides, since Hobie already fought against Snaper once, he is no longer afraid of him, and in the end, the two of them sit in a bench, and Snaper reveals that he recorded that last fight too. So Hobie tells him to delete the video, but the boy asks him to. Don't worry, after all, no one would watch a recycled video that could possibly be fake. Having said that, Snaper extends his hand to Hobie and asks them both to come together, as the two of them together can win a lot of money. And besides, Snaper states that for Hobie to receive his money, the boy will still need to go through several boring bureaucratic processes. And to encourage him even further, Snaper explains that all of Paco's success is due to his work, so he is willing to be Hobie's producer. And upon hearing these promises of easy money, Hobie starts to fall for him, and Snaper says too, he's sure he'll be popular at school again, and to do that he just needs to regain access to Hobie's account. And then he tries to close a deal on the winnings, where Hobie only gets 10% while he keeps the other 90%, and upon hearing, the boy immediately refuses the offer and turns away. And then Snaper starts making several desperate proposals, but Hobie continues to follow his path until the boy decides to leave him with 90% of the winnings and only keep 10. So Hobie becomes more interested in his proposal, and then Snaper explains that the painting they will create consists of framing bullies in real time.
And already in class, Paco takes advantage of his friend's recent fame and opens a live with the two of them in the background, and then he returns to announce your fake draw, saying that one of your followers will win a latest generation PC, and at that moment Hobin, I really appreciate that Paco is lying to them, because both the random selection and the gift are all fake. And in addition to unmasking his draw, Hobin also says that Paco is fake on camera, because when he turns off his cell phone, he becomes the delinquent he always was, and Hobin takes off his shirt and says that the bruises on his chest were caused by Paco, and in addition to speaking to his audience, Hobin makes it clear that he will expose all of this on his channel as well. That said, he feels he doesn't need to be afraid, after all the boy always hits anyway, so if he's going to get hit, Hobin at least wants to monetize the beating. And when they notice a strange movement in the room, all the students go there and notice Pago being extremely pissed at Hobin. In that, Kanigon watches that moment carefully and feels that that situation will take viewers from Paco's channel to the of them. However, Paco shows his cell phone completely discharged and says that the live must have gone offline. Then he starts beating Hobin, and then Kanigon continues recording that scene live and already puts on a sensationalist title to draw even more public attention. And little by little they are gaining more and more subscribers with that situation. In this, Kanigon states that Paco is in fact very stupid, because at no point would their plan be to expose him during his own live. And as for Hobin, Kanigon asks him to let him continue doing what he does best, which is getting beaten, because that way they will at least get some money. But in the meantime, Hobin wonders if being beaten would really be the way for them to make money, and so he decides challenge the bully, and upon seeing this Kanigon calls him an idiot, as the boy will only prolong the beating he will receive. In this, Hobin looks around at everyone and wonders why no one is moving to separate them, and little by little Hobin notices that the siege is closed, so there is no way for him to retreat from that fight. With that said, he returns to face Paco and feels an absurd fear and analyzing him completely, because compared to him, Hobin is a chicken. As a result, he begins to rack his brains to think of a solution and feels that the easiest thing to do is to apologize, but Paco talks again about his mother's illness, and upon hearing this, Hobin remembers the other times he made fun of his mother's condition. His mother, and then he goes on the attack, but Paco doesn't even move, and from afar, Kanigon reminds him that he is much lighter than his opponent, so it was obvious that this attack would fail. Then Paco begins another wave of attacks against Hobin, and says that he will gently place him on a hospital machine next to him, his mother's side. And already on the ground, Hobin notices that the fight against Paco is completely different from the time he fought with Kanigon. That being said, the boy feels that his end is near, and when Paco tries to hit Hobin again, he is interrupted by a student next to him, side, which asks them to turn down the volume. After all, this is disturbing their sleep. Then Paco tells the boy to go home to sleep, and then the student gets up, and everyone immediately recognizes him as Munseong Kim, a rising star in the world of MMA, and upon noticing the danger, Paco apologizes to the boy, and Hobin notes that Munseong was capable of commanding respect in the entire room just using his voice. And with that, Hobin understands that the boy is on top of a world completely different from his, and then Munseong says that we'll go back to sleep and asks no one to bother him again. And as for Kanigon, he says that Hobin shined brighter than him expected, and although he appears to have lost, this whole situation earned him good fans. And meanwhile, Paco goes back to charging his cell phone, and claims that his cell phone being discharged helped him not to be exposed. But upon logging into his accounts, he discovers that Hobin got what he wanted. And as for the boy, he feels like prey, however he is happy to have managed to hit Paco where it hurts most. In this case, he uploaded the video of the attack he suffered on NewTube, and because of that, Paco's name was highlighted in the Seekers, as everyone already knew about the exposure he suffered. And upon realizing what happened, Paco decides to open a live to apologize, but he misses a conversation with the producer, where he demonstrates that he is just faking his reactions. And then, the public began to search on their own for all the other videos where he acted, and in addition, a page was created just to show in real time the number of Paco's followers dropping. And in contrast, Hobin started to boost his career on NewTube, and so he decides to focus only on that, because now that he has come this far, it would be a waste to stop. And in the afternoon of the following day, Snapper states that they should continue creating content focused on fights, but he notes that there is a problem with this strategy. In this case, it is the length of the videos, because there is no way to beat someone for 30 minutes. Followed. In this he explains that NewTube pays them based on ads and not views, so if they want to do more money, they need to place even more ads on longer videos. But upon hearing this, Hobin reminds him that Snapper doesn't lasts not a minute in a real fight, and the minimum time to generate any revenue is 3 minutes. In this, Hobin goes to the internet to improve his fighting skills, but when he finds himself lacking the patience to read articles, he goes directly on NewTube and finds a channel with 0 subscribers talking about how to fight. In this he is already discouraged, as he believes that a channel with 0 subscribers has never made a single video. But when going to the tab of videos on the channel, Hobin comes across an infinite amount of material to study, and upon opening one of the videos, the creator introduces himself as Samdak, and upon noticing that a foreigner's channel would be responsible for changing his life, Hobin is in shock, but he goes ahead with the video tutorial. In this, Samdak explains that before leaving for practical techniques, the fighter must stick to his mental state before fight, and the first rule is not to get excited, because by doing so, the fighter ends up losing control of everything, including the swing of your fists. That being said, Samdak starts teaching the first technique, which consists of learning how to take a beating without getting hurt, and when he sees, therefore, Hobin feels like he is falling for a scam, where the presenter draws the public's attention with free content to then sell something. And then, Hobin decides to put it aside and go to sleep, and the next day, he resigns from his job, and explains that working part-time will not bring you enough money to pay for your mother's treatment, and in the meantime, the employees comment on Hobin's dismissal, and upon hearing this, Bomi Choi is visibly upset about the situation. And as for the boy's boss, he jokes with Hobin, saying that he's only going to quit work because he became famous, and then he says in a joking tone that he will also try to be something on NewTube, and in the middle of the conversation, Bomi Choi appears there, and says, "I didn't imagine Paco was like that." So Hobin's exposure helped everyone see who he really was. And in addition, the girl asks for his contact information, because as he is leaving the company, they will not be able to see each other again, and when he returns to school, he starts exchanging casual messages with her, but he is interrupted by a snapper who asks which is making him so happy. In this, Hobin gives the excuse that he was just researching topics for new content, but Snapper notices his lie, and he asks how his life is now that he has more than 100,000 subscribers on NewTube. And speaking of which, Snapper deduces that Hobin is the first common person to reach this milestone with just 2 videos. After all, these numbers are difficult even for some celebrities. That said, he gets straight to the point, and asks if Hobin has ever found a way to fight for more than 3 minutes, in that he remembers the bizarre channel he found the night before, but he says he will need to think more about this subject. And And upon noticing his partner's slowness, Snapper tells him to get ahead quickly because now he is a celebrity who must satisfy his will of his audience, but Hobin states that being famous doesn't bring him anything good, but as soon as he says this, Rumi suggests that they collaborate on a live. And with that, Hobin immediately changes his opinion about fame not bringing anything good, but he asks why it is for him. Proposing this, after all she was Paco's friend. In this Rumi explains that her audience keeps asking her to do live with him, and in addition she states that she never liked work with the real Paco, and speaking of him, he himself shows up there and claims that Hobin was responsible for and his channel on NewTube. And then, the boy remembers Samdak's teachings, where he said that a shaken opponent is the easiest enemy to be made dejected because when a person does not control themselves emotionally, they lose control of their fists and begin to be dominated for your emotions. And then, Hobin manages to easily dodge Paco's attacks and notices that the situation is unfolding just as Samdak had said, so he decides to use the technique of being hit without getting hurt, especially because the blow will come anyway. And as for the snapper, he starts recording the fight and reminds Paco about what will happen if he uploads the video to the channel. In that, Paco decides to leave the place, but guarantees that he will still take revenge for this. And then, Snapper states that Hobin should thank him for that, after all he just saved him from a beating, but Hobin, he remains thoughtful about all that and also about Samdak. And after school, he notices that producing fighting content is more difficult than he expected, and so Hobin leaves this issue aside and goes to talk to Choi, but before he could call her, two fans stop him on the street, but soon after they turn out to be bandits, who take him to an alley to try to rob him. Snapper sees the whole scene and tries to help, but in the end he ends up getting the worst of it, and then the criminal steals Hobin's cell phone and leaves, but the boy tries to insist on his device, because without it Hobin won't be able to talk to Bomi Choi. In this, Snapper gets up and reveals that he was recording the whole situation, and furthermore, he states that if Hobin goes after the couple of thugs, it will bring a lot of views, and although Hobin knows that his audience just wants to see him get beaten, he decides to deliver what they want, thus announcing the transmission of a viral hit. And after having your stolen cell phone, Robin appears at the karaoke to charge it back. Then the bully starts asking why he is there, and while they are arguing Robin starts to think about what the head of Parrot said that he advises Robin to notice, which is his opponent's dominant hand, and seeing that he is holding the microphone with his right hand he already knows what to expect, and the bird head says that if he is right-handed he should stay on the left to make it easier for them to raise their fists. The bully gets up and wants to fight, and the parrot head says that if he's on the right he won't be able to use his left if there's something in front of him, and then Robin thinks that if he's going to get caught he's going to try that anyway, and he remember Parrot Head saying that even if you can't dodge the punch, at least you have a way to react. After all, those who haven't trained in many martial arts tend to move a lot of shoulders when throwing a punch, and when Bully 1 hits Robin with his forehead and everyone they are scared. After all, this is not a common thing to see, and so Bird Head explains that the strongest moment of the punch is at the exact moment it reaches the target, that is, it can get in front of it and be hit before the punch reaches its strength. Total. Then he says the name. That's an operation. The whip doesn't hurt when it hits earlier. When it comes out he starts to wonder what he's doing, and the master tells him again to imagine a headbutt with that fist, because pulling his chin back to protect himself leaves him in position for the headbutt. Robin notices that the punch didn't hurt at all, but he wonders what he's going to do next time, and the bully even asks if he's a masochist and tries to hit him, but Robin manages to dodge even though he moved late, and the bird head says that it's difficult for a normal person to dodge a punch, but his opponent is also a normal person. He makes a mistake and the Waven starts to work, and he says that one person wants to be hit in the head and the other wants to hit the other person's head, so he says that since one is trying to get it right and can't, it looks like Robin is a boxer, and he changes the Waven and he talks that by focusing and hitting his fist the fear of the fist also disappears, then his focuses will start to miss, and even if they hit you won't feel any pain. And then noticing that the fight is no longer going anywhere else, Robin starts screaming for his cell phone because he needs to respond kindly, and the guy starts hitting him again, and Robin continues to dodge everywhere, and meanwhile the chat goes crazy making fun of this crazy person. So Jig-Sai notices Robin's strategy, realizing that he is being left to hit for wanting, and the bully. He also starts to find it strange asking who that guy is and why he doesn't dodge, and Robin starts to think that it was stupid to just watch a video. After all, he only learned how not to get hit, he still doesn't know how to hit. Jig-Sai note that the fight, it's horrible, it's very slow, and people keep coming out of that live, so he thinks something must happen. After all, the video against Bakugo was very quick, but this last forever is also bad, and he wonders if it's better to stop them now before may they lose lose more people. Then someone in the chat comments that Robin is going to win, and Dick Sai realizes that this is the same person who knew M Song when he appeared on Live, and he says that it is very difficult for Robin to win. After all, he is receiving a lot of blows, but the viewer returns to send messages saying that they are amateurs and tell them to look at that bully's fist, and his fist is all red from hitting Robin's head so much. And he says that he hasn't noticed yet because of the adrenaline, and the bully also notices that your fist was into space and starts asking what happened to that, and the guy in the comment says that his fist swells even hitting sandbags, and he got too carried away and to hit that stone head so many times when adrenaline rushes the head the pain comes straight, and Dick Sai ends happily because Roby ended up winning, but the scene at the end of it was really bad. The boy's face is completely swollen, and maybe the hospital bill will be more expensive than that cell phone, but in any case the investment was worth it. After all, they gained a lot of fans, while that's what Robins is concerned about responding to. And in the meantime, that girl coming directly from Free Fire and continues watching his Live. Then it is said that the upload was complete and the video had more than 1 million views this week alone, and he says that the Kugu's Kinka channel has 4 videos with a total of 25 million views, and they finally received the first payment, giving a total of 2 million yen, and everyone is happy with the payment, but they note that 0.1 yen per view is very low. But Dick Sai says that there isn't much to do. After all, it took a while for them to be approved to be able to receive monetization, and Robin says that he thought the number of views was directly linked to the number of money, and I didn't know that what generated revenue in the videos were the ads, and Dick says that he got tired of explaining this to him, but it's still possible to say that views are linked to ads, and he says that they are the ones who reproduce them, and he tells the boy to remember that 0 AN by visualization is a general rule. So Robin says that they just keep doing lives with sensational and dangerous things, but Dick leaves and says that they were lucky. After all, they didn't get a yellow mark, and Robin says that he doesn't know what that is, and Jay explains that it's a censorship system within YouTube itself, and if a video gets a yellow mark it is demonetized. He says that every YouTuber is afraid of this. They usually put on violent or very aggressive content and also sensual content. While they are having this conversation, R appears doing his live sensualizing for his audience, and Dick leaves starts to feel a bad feeling about this, so she ends up seeing them both and sees Robin with a source of free subscribers, making the boys have to run away from her to avoid being used. And after finally get rid of this threat that wants to steal his subscribers, Robin admires a set in a store and thinks it's great, but when he sees the price it's 140,000 yen, and that is very expensive for him, and the boy immediately thinks that he could buy another 100 of the same online, and he thinks that 140,000 is how much he owes Dick in salary. But when he looks at the boy, he is already buying the code in cash, and then the boy wonders how he's going to buy that when it's his entire salary, and Dick leaves and looks back asking if he's not going to buy it. After all, that's a basic item and you need to have at least one, so Robin is amazed for him. Consider this as basic, and Robin has only now noticed that even if he wins 2 million yen, only the rich know how to spend that money properly, and he immediately says he won't buy the set. Then he receives a message and is disbelieved by what he reads, and the next day he has the set. After all, he has PR to impress him well. He asks what she wants with him right in that place full of houses, and meanwhile the people around envy the kid's whistle, saying that he would never be able to have the money to buy an original like that. And when he gets nervous he ends up opening a live stream, catching the attention of everyone around who recognize him as that guy who fights for money, and they even say that he gave a friend everything for views. Then Robin starts to notice that they are saying that they understand him well, so he says that it's a good thing he has his fans with him. Then a girl he comes running saying he's a big fan and asks to take a photo, and Robin immediately thinks it's him, but she was talking to Jum who was behind him, and he's really embarrassed in front of all his fans who console him, saying that they are still there for him. Then his rival says that he is there to interview people and notices a very pretty girl asking to interview her, but she says that she is there for someone and asks her if she is going to meet her boyfriend, and, well, he points out to Robin saying that they are going to meet him, and he also notices that they are both wearing the same style of coat, and Robin starts talking about himself, saying that he is short with bad sports skills and his grades are so, and he says also that he is not rich, and he was certainly ashamed of himself. And after humiliating himself, Paco appears in front of him telling him to get out of the way, putting the boy head on the wall, and he starts to think that he would at least like to know how to fight like Paco, and he says that his school is a reflection of society where only the strongest survive. So while Paco walks he collides with Musong and also ends up facing the wall. After all, he collided with someone much stronger, and Robin notices that Paco wasn't either an exception to the rule, and he note that he didn't admire Paco, and yes, Musong wanted to be him, but that's no longer true now. After all, a beauty like that is in front of him, so she asks him what he's thinking about. Then the idiot starts to get all excited when their hands touch him. He makes a whole fun fic in his mind about them being married and even having children. Then his daughter brings him back to reality, so when he comes back, well, he thinks it's strange, and the boy starts making a lot of excuses, also saying that it's from kind of quiet. Then he notices that drop the ball and says says that she must definitely be getting bored of being with him, but then people around start talking about the two, saying that they seem to be a couple, but they feel sorry for the girl for hanging out with someone short like that, and he soon rents a triplex in the boy's mind, saying that he must be embarrassed to hang out with someone like him. He takes off his coat, saying that the two of them don't even match, and the girl is sad about that, but while they eat she keeps trying to pull subject over and over again, but the boy responds with empty and dry answers to the girl. Then she gets up and suggests that they both leave. After all, she asked him out because she thought it would be cool. After all, it's good to talk to him via text, but in person he's barely saying anything, and then she apologizes for making her put up with him during the day, and when she's about to leave he starts saying that she must be embarrassed to be with him. Guys, let's catch up on therapy, self-care, self-love, because this is not normal. No man. And he starts to apologize to her, saying that he had never dated a girl and in fact had never even spoken to any girl, and he starts talking about his nerdy habits, saying that he doesn't even know how to behave and that his hobby is also staying at home watching TV. YouTube. He was too embarrassed to admit it, and he says he also wanted to eat, but he was too embarrassed to do so. He asks how he will be able to concentrate on food looking at a pretty face like hers. Then the girl noticed that while he is talking he is sweating a lot, and Robin said that he decided to stay on that side because he thought it would be too hot for her, and then she smiles asking him to leave, and the Free Fire character who has been following him all day says that she made a good move, and halfway through she gets a call saying she's with a friend who he in turn starts to think he looks like her boyfriend walking next to the girl. So she tells him she was talking to her friend from elementary school who will find them right there, and she says that she lost contact with him a long time ago, and maybe he even meets the boy, and he asks who he is, and she says Muzong King, and soon he starts to get nervous about it because he doesn't want her to know that he is part of the group of idiots, as if it were very difficult to find out, right? He goes back to his delirium, so when he gets home Moon is in good spirits, and she asks who that guy could be, and he says that he is just someone who wanted walk with a pretty girl by your side and in real age the good. He asks if he knows the boy, and Robin lies saying that he does, and the girl asks if they are close, and Robin lies again saying that the two are friends, all to hide his shameful side of her. But the worst happens. After all, Muzong was right behind him, and the girl, to make matters worse, asks if it's true that he and Robin are friends, and he looks at the boy with a look like he doesn't agree with that. And the guy just get into nonsense. You see, want to lie, it's better not to lie, because she already liked him being a damn idiot. So let's go to episode 4. If you want, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll be bringing it to you soon, so I'll see you in the next one. Video went. And when saying that he is a friend and Munseong, Hobin starts to get shocked because he barely knows the guy, so Munseong finds it strange the fact that the boy called him a friend, and Hobin in turn notes that he ended up breaking a rule just to impress Bomi, and he believes he will be punished for breaking this rule. But instead, Munseong reaffirms what Hobin said and explains that they are classmates, therefore they must be friends. In this, Munseong tries to be nice to Hobin, asking more about his life and his NewTube project, and upon meeting each other, the three go out for a walk together, but Hobin feels that he is left out in that group, and so he invents an excuse to go home, and he tells himself that he would end up dying of self-contempt if he continued like that embarrassing situation. But as he leaves the place, Hobin notices that he gave the worst excuse of all when he said that he had pain in his ingrown toenail, and when seeing him acting like this, Jixi starts complaining to Hobin and says that he was getting along very well with Munseong and Bomi, so he shouldn't have run away out of nowhere. Whereupon Hobin asks what he should have done in this situation, and states that unlike Munseong, he is an ugly guy and like an ingrown and twisted nail. And furthermore, Hobin explains that he and Bomi live in completely different worlds, in which Jixi states that falling in love is the same as being in a fight, so he should not give up just because a stronger opponent arrives. However, Hobin says he won't lose the fight if he doesn't participate in it. In this, Jixi paraphrases a world-famous basketball coach, and says that when we give up something, the game can now be considered closed, and in addition, he reminds Hobin of the advances that Bomi made on him, so she is also demonstrating have a minimum of interest. Other than that, Jixi also noticed that she was sad when Hobin said he was going home, and that's a good sign that he is actually closer to victory than any of his rivals, so Hobin jumps in Jixi and thanks him because he ended up opening his eyes to reality. And with that, he decides to go to Bomi. Now Jixi, he positions his cell phone to record everything he can. After all, he has almost. I'm sure Hobin will get dumped live. And upon reaching her, Hobin explains that his ingrown toenail has improved, and then Munseong is willing to pull out the ingrown toenail to help him, but Hobin is scared by this idea and chooses not to accept it. Then Munseong decides to leave them alone to go to his training, and Bomi explains to Hobin that his colleague has a fight that week who comes, and that's why he's always very busy. And as she speaks, Hobin notes that he misunderstood the situation because he thought Bomi and Munseong were in a situation meeting. Then Munseong turns around and says that he saw Hobin's excellent performance in the fight on his NewTube channel, and when remembering one of the fights, Munseong notices that the boy used the technique of taking a few punches beforehand to minimize the damage damage. That said, he goes back on his way and says he's looking forward to seeing his next video. And when left alone with Hobin, Bomi notices that he would like to tell him something, so the boy starts to get agitated and asks what is the ideal type of man she likes, and Bomi responds that he likes sincere people, so he decides to be sincere, to act according to her tastes. But before declaring himself to her, Hobin pulls Jixi out of his hiding place, and then a group of young people locate Hobin through the live stream that Jixi was doing, and says that they are there to get revenge on the boy. So Hobin tells Bomi to get out of there so he can resolve the situation, and when he sees the boy trying to play hero, Paco pulls Bomi by the arm and insults her in every name, leaving Hobin extremely angry, but he remembers the man's advice with bird-headed and tries to remain as calm as possible. In this he changes the game, irritating Paco first, and when receiving the blow, Hobin tries to use the same strategy of getting hit without getting hurt, but Paco manages to counter-attack him as he had already seen the boy's video before. And upon receiving a hook from his enemy, Hobin, he starts to feel dizzy and realizes that he should have seen the man's other videos to avoid using just a single strategy, and then he remembers when Munseong said that Hobin didn't follow further, but he remains confused about this phrase. And when reflecting more on his life of abysses, Hobin remembers that the turning point in his life was when he discovered a channel of somewhat different martial arts, which taught him to fight on his own. Other than that, he also used what he learned from this channel to make money, and even though he didn't like showing his face, for Hobin everything was fair if the subject was money. And seeing himself financially independent, he felt he could be a normal student like anyone else. However, he became increasingly lazy, consequently stopping studying and learning to fight. And with the beating he is now receiving from Paco, Hobin feels that he is paying the price for his laziness, so he asks Bomi can go home. After all, he doesn't want her to see what his face looks like after all those blows, because the aim is to hide from her how weak he really is. And in the midst of that torture, a girl watches everything from afar. Then Paco makes Hobin kneel and apologize, and at the same time, to do this, he finds it strange that he is bowing down in front of the girl he likes, but Paco says he couldn't feel confident in his apology. And then, he tells the boy to take off his pants and apologize again. After all, they are live now, and upon discovering this, Hobin doesn't react, and Jixi apologizes for recording him. And as for Paco, he tells the boy to take off his pants again and apologize, because only then will he forgive him. In that, Bomi hits Paco in the face, and then he grabs her violently and tells Jixi to turn the camera to another place because he couldn't hit a woman live. But before that, Hobin decides to obey his order by lowering his pants, as that is the only way he found to protect the girl he likes. And upon seeing this, Paco starts to laugh and says that his subscribers will certainly collapse after this humiliation. In that, Hobin threatens to take off his underwear too, and then Paco starts to worry and asks the boy not to do that, otherwise his account may be suspended forever. However, the boy continues with his last act of resistance and tries to show the tool live to everyone. However, Munseong appears just in time and stops him from doing this, and then he takes care of Paco and his henchmen. At this, Hobin feels even more humiliated, and then Munseong decides to leave with Bomi to leave the boy alone for a while. And the next day in class, Hobin wonders how he ended up becoming so slow. After all, he used to be slower, proactive earlier. And when he thinks a little more, he deduces that things have changed after meeting Paco, as the boy simply started to hitting him randomly, and this made Hobin slowly start to hate school. And what's more, the boy lost the confidence to look people in the eye because of all the fear he felt, so the students around him began to see him as a true failure with no attitude whatsoever. And Hobin, in turn, explains that he was tired of it all, to the point where he could barely curse his enemies, not even in your thoughts. After all this recap of his failures, Hobin starts crying, and then Jixi apologizes to him for recording that whole situation with Paco. And on another day, Paco starts another one of his lives, and is already asking for viewers who are actually willing to support him, in which he presents Jixi with a shitty makeup to his audience, and when looking at Hobin's wallet, he notices that the boy hasn't been to school for days. And then, Paco catches his attention for the live and tells him to say hi to his followers, and as for Bomi, she tries to call for Hobin, but the boy still doesn't answer his cell phone. In this, he continues watching the Birdman channel, in addition to starting to train heavily to change himself, and while he trains, the computer remains connected to the Birdman's channel, which explains that to change, people must not just pay attention to reading stories of people who have had successful experiences, because for the Birdman, the answer to this is within each one and the amount of anger that each one has towards themselves. Therefore, we must all use our anger as a fuel for change. And then, he explains that to master the next techniques that he will teach to follow, the student will need to dedicate himself for the period of a month. And in the meantime, Paco continues doing his live and calls Hobin to school, but Jixi advises your friend not to go, because staying at home he will remain safer. However, Hobin decides to go to school anyway, and when he sees him, Paco is relieved. After all, he was tired of waiting. Then Hobin throws the cell phone into Jixi's hand with a live stream open and asks the boy to film it. In this, Paco deduces that Hobin has gone crazy, and the boy, in turn, names the title of his comeback live, calling it How to Fight and Beat a Normal Person. And during the conflict, he remembers all his effort to get there and affirms to himself that he is not a loser, so how he thought it was. And going back in time a little, Jixi congratulates Rumi for his 100,000 subscribers, and comments on Hobin not having returned to the school, but soon after he leaves this subject aside, and asks if Rumi would need a producer, in which case Paco enters the middle of the conversation, and it's strange that the boy is abandoning his friend Hobin. In this, Jixi explains that he just put up with him as a business partner, but since he is going off the deep end, he no longer sees any point in continuing with Hobin. Then Paco starts to beat him, and says that traitorous guys like him irritate him a lot, and upon seeing this scene, the people around, they show that they feel disgusted with him, and Jixi states that he really is a person worthy of contempt, as he always sucks up to stronger people to survive. And seeing Paco being accepted back onto the internet even after its cancellation, Jixi is outraged, and his anger increases even more when he sees that Paco became even more famous after changing his personality to a rebellious student. And as for Hobin, he continues to lose subscribers to his viral hit song. However, he notices that there are still people waiting for Hobin's return with the channel, but Jixi is worried about how long people will still wait for him. And as for Paco, he intends to make his channel reach 1 million subscribers soon, but to achieve this, he asks Jixi's help, asking the boy to bring the Hobin to school the next day, and in exchange for that, he promises to drop him off, be your cameraman again. And although Jixi despises Paco, he accepts his proposal, as he needs to suck up to the strongest to survive, so he goes to the hospital where Hobin's mother is, and says he needs to know where her son is, as he must return to school urgently. In this, she writes the address of Hobin's house on a piece of paper and hands it to him, leaving Jixi visibly relieved, but in the end. Next day, he explains to Paco that he was unable to contact Hobin, as he didn't want to go out to help him, so Paco gets angry and starts beating him, and asks Jixi to make a video asking Hobin to go to school. But instead of saying what he was told, Jixi tells Hobin not to go to school, as his plan is to beat him, and he earns 50,000 yen for this, and when he sees him confronting him, Paco hits him again. At that, Jixi remembers the conversation that had with Hobin's mother, where she had told him that her son spoke well of him, because Hobin was happy to have a real friend in his classroom. And meanwhile, Paco sends a video to Hobin showing Jixi thrown on the ground, and tells Hobin to go save him soon, but the boy again asks his friend to stay at home, but Hobin goes to school anyway, and throws his cell phone in the Jixi's lap with a live stream on, so he asks to be filmed, and while recording it, Jixi starts cursing him, saying that Hobin should have stayed at home, just as he had ordered. In this, Hobin starts using the technique of being beaten without hurting himself, and this makes Paco laugh. After all, he had already used this technique previously, and then Hobin remembers that in fact he was very hasty in using this technique more than once, against the same person, because that's what made him embarrass himself in front of Bomi. In this, he wonders how he will face her and her followers after the beating he received, and in addition he finds himself again feel like a failure, but soon remembers the Birdman channel that teaches martial arts, and decides to go back to watching the classes. So Hobin goes to lesson 2, where he will learn to fight and beat a normal person, and at first the Birdman is the order to pay attention to your weight, as this is an important factor during fights, so Hobin must take protein, high quality, to gain more muscle mass. And the second step is to have the desire to evolve, otherwise Hobin will not be able to build his ideal body. And finally, the third step is to have vigor, and the Birdman advises him to practice swimming, as this is the sport that most builds stamina, and with this he will be able to endure longer fights. However, the Birdman claims that he will not drastically change his body or his vigor in just 1 month, but he will proposes teaching them a technique. But first, he talks about a time when a reporter asked a champion what it would be the martial art he would learn if he were a bullied child, and he states that he would not learn a martial art but rather a technique, and then the Birdman states that he will reveal the technique chosen by the champion, and for this he tells viewers to spread their legs shoulder width apart, and he then dictates all the other steps. And returning to the present, Hobin uses this same technique against Paco, landing him a low kick in the MMA style, but he mocks the boy, saying that a low kick must be delivered at thigh level. At that, Munseong corrects him, and explains that that is an MMA style low kick, a blow that causes damage instantly, and so Munseong takes advantage and subscribes to Hobin's channel to follow him more closely. And meanwhile, Paco goes after the boy, and Hobin remembers the other skill that the Birdman passed on to him, which would be to flee if the opponent is stronger. And after finding an opening, he hits Paco again with the low kick, but when he tries to exploit this attack more, Paco learn to defend yourself from him. In this, this, Hobin uses a second technique which consists of landing a surprise punch on his opponent after leaving him focused just on the low kick. And upon seeing his friend on the ground, Paco's sycophants threaten to confront Hobin, but Jixi puts himself in front of him to protect him, so Munseong goes to Hobin and congratulates him on the fight. And after a few days pass, Paco stops attending school, but Hobin doesn't care about that. After all, his channel, he passed the 100,000 subscribers mark after he fought with Paco. In this, he takes advantage of his return to the internet and buys his mother new clothes, and then she talks about having received his friend visits the other day, and Hobin deduces that it's Munseong, and Jixi hears everything outside and gets angry for being confused. And in a business conversation, Jixi suggests that they hire an editor for the channel, as this will help their business grow even more. After all, a good addition will retain the audience even more. So Hobin notes that the idea is good, but he wonders how they will go about finding the editor. And Jixi starts doing a live, announcing that they will need an editor for the channel, in which some people start to write their experiences, but none catch their attention so far, and to better filter the candidates, Hobin asks if anyone there has experience with editing. And then, a viewer speaks out, saying that he knows how to edit a little, so Hobin decides to give this candidate a chance, but Jixi explains that this user is just a boomer uncle, but Hobin says he doesn't care much about that, as long as the guy knows how to edit. And then, they arrange to meet in the classroom, and just before they meet, Jixi goes to Hobin to see the demonstration works that the candidate sent, and when he notices that the edits are similar to those of seniors on Facebook, he tells Hobin to block the guy's contact, but he refuses to do that. After all, they promise to give the guy a chance. And then, the person in question appears, surprising everyone, because instead of a big uncle, they come across a young girl with the spirit of a big uncle, who arrives at the place complaining about how young people are these days. Then the students around her recognize her as Go Lee, the freshman famous for being very cute. And although she is very cute, people don't usually hang around her because of her boomer way of speaking, as she lived abroad and learned to speak Japanese online. Then Gol goes to them and asks them to continue with the interview, and then Jixi points his finger in her direction to make fun of the girl's face, and Gol in turn takes his finger and scolds him, saying that pointing at others it's a lack of education. In this, the boy begins to travel with this simple touch, and imagines himself married to her, but this daydream lasts a short time, as Hobin insists on bringing him back to reality, so they continue with the interview, and Gol shows some test edits he made for the viral hit channel. And before seeing everything, Jixi decides to approve the girl, but Hobin asks him to calm down a little, as the two need to reach a consensus. With that said, he checks the edit again, and notices that Gol highlighted some funny comments from the video with subtitles. In this, she explains that these comments are one of the charms of a viral hit, so it makes perfect sense to highlight them. And then Hobin notices that her editing actually makes the video good, but he feels like something is missing, so he asks if she had some difficulty in the editing process. And Gol says that he had difficulty censoring Hobin's hair because it is very thick, and upon hearing this, Hobin turns red with embarrassment and decides to hire her immediately to avoid further exposure. But first, he asks why she chose to work with them, and Gol remembers the times he saw Hobin fighting, and says that working with them would be a pleasure. Having said that, they both shake hands and sign this alliance, and in the meantime, Bomi finds out about this new hire through a viral hit post. And when she notices that Hobin has time for the viral hit and not for her, Bomi gets slightly upset and wonders when he will return her messages. And when passing by an arcade store, she sees movement in the place, as one of the players took the Street Fighter 2 seriously and ended up giving a real beating to the other customers in the establishment, whereupon another guy goes to him to complain about his actions, and then, the boy he asks him to give him 501 so he can continue playing. And as night falls, Jixi comments about student Tae-hun Song, a former fighter from the new Max MMA League, who was expelled for causing too much trouble, and in addition, the boy also practices Taekwondo, which makes Joyok crack up, laugh as they only need to focus on their opponent's kicks to beat them. And taking this into consideration, Jixi believes that he may be the strongest student in Tae-hun school, as he is capable of finishing off the strongest student in the place. And upon hearing this, Gol corrects him, and says that the type of Taekwondo that is used for real fights is combat Taekwondo. After all, it differs from sport Taekwondo, whose objective is just to score more points than your adversary. And the combat modality, this focuses on taking down your opponent with attacks. In this, she comments on an experiment carried out with several martial arts experts, which sought to measure the speed of their kicks, and among all martial arts, the Taekwondo specialists' kick stood out from the rest, both in terms of speed and strength. Hobin understands that Taekwondo is a really good form of fighting, but he asks what the fighter Tae-hun has to do with him, and Jixi simply says that he should fight the boy, who in this case is a former professional fighter. In this case, Hobin Hobin starts complaining to him. And as for Gul, she remembers an interview they did with a martial arts master where he said that taekwondo strikes are very open and this means they can be hit very easily. However, he states that there is a scam that is an exception to this rule. And the blow in question is the kick from behind, which in this case is the only taekwondo blow where the opponent turns his back to his opponent. In this, Hobin notes that Tae-hun is not just any criminal but a professional fighter that you can tear it to pieces if you want. And the next day, he receives more information from Tae-hun Song, the psycho bro from Gangbuk High School where everyone fears him, and that he ended up giving up his athletic career for some reason. And in one of his oppressive interactions with the students, Tae-hun asks one of the boys to give him his shoe, but when he sees him taking a while to obey him, Tae-hun starts beating his friend. And although he is robbing the boy, his objective is not to obtain other people's things, but rather to humiliate his victim, making him watch his friend being beaten. And upon reading about the boy's sadistic habit, Hobin feels even more shocked about facing him, but Jixi tells him to continue with the plan. After all, they promised this fight to the viewers, but Hobin states that he never promised that he would face professional fighters. And meanwhile, Tae-hun walks around, until suddenly he bumps into a group of men, and one of them calls him out for hitting his friend the other day, and upon hearing this, Tae-hun starts a fight with Ichiro, and then asks them to give him 500 won. But instead, the leader of the gang mocks him, saying that Tae-hun practices a child's martial art, so he tries to attack him, but Tae-hun dodges and hits him with a kick from behind. And having mastered the whole situation, he asks the leader's friend to give him 500 won, otherwise their friend will continue to get beaten. So the guy starts taking the money out of his pocket, but Tae-hun changes his mind and starts increasing the amount what he initially asked for, until it reaches a point where the leader's friend cannot pay, so he can continue his humiliation. And meanwhile, Jixi records the entire situation, but decides to leave when he notices that Tae-hun looked at him. He feels that he was barely seen, but Tae-hun follows him and asks why he is filming him. And to get out of that situation, Jixi says that she was just filming his spectacular movements, and in the middle of it all, Gul appears there shouting at the fighter, but when she realizes that it's Tae-hun, she calms down and decides to stay quiet. In that, Tae-hun says that they are from the viral hit, and also says that he heard that they promised to beat him up. And then, he asks Hobin to give him his NewTube account, and upon hearing this, Hobin notes that if he doesn't comply, the boy will start hitting his friends, and to avoid this, he suggests a fight between the two from now on. 1 month. And when he sees Hobin stopped, Tae-hun starts hitting Snapper, and asks them to give him the viral hit, so Hobin tries to talk to him, but the boy raises his leg to his face, and asks him again to give him his channel. In this, Hobin creates several scenarios in his head where the two fight, and notices that he doesn't have the slightest chance of winning, and so, he decides to hand over his channel, just as the boy is asking. Then Tae-hun slaps him and asks why he is giving in so easily, and Hobin explains that he will save his friends if he does what the boy is asking. And after that, they take Snapper to the hospital, and upon noticing his friend angry with him, Hobin says that he had to hand over the channel anyway, otherwise Snapper would have even more injuries, and Snapper states that he cannot accept this situation. After all, he wanted to continue with their project on NewTube even if he needed to be beaten for it. And then, Snapper reveals that he was inspired when he saw Hobin beating Paco for the first time, because at that moment he discovered that even a weakling is capable of performing miracles, so seeing him retreat like that is not what he expected. Then Snapper asks if his friend has any pride, and Hobin says no. After all, him having faced Paco doesn't mean much, since he was just a delinquent, but Tae-hun is a different case, as he is a professional fighter, so Hobin believes it's okay to back off and be afraid of guys like that. In this, he apologizes to Snapper, but the boy says that Hobin can do what he thinks is best, and after he leaves, Gul also goes to the place to see his friend, and Snapper starts acting nice, and says that Tae-hun just got lucky in his last fight. That being said, he asks Gul to leave him alone, as he needs to rest for now, but being alone, he feels useless. After all, Snapper wanted to show off to her, but instead, Gul saw him being beaten like a child rude girl who talks back to her parents. At that, he feels very embarrassed, and as for Hobin, he stays outside, and remembers that he went through something similar to Snapper when he was humiliated in front of Bomi. And meanwhile, Tae-hun goes back to the arcade machine, and then, Hobin goes to the place to play too, and humiliates Tae-hun by defeating him without taking a single hit. In this, the boy goes to him to complain about his defeat, and to escape Tae-hun's wrath, he says he is there to give him his NewTube account, but Hobin proposes that they fight in a month, and only then can he keep his account. Then Tae-hun grabs him by the shirt, and asks what he will do if he decides to keep the bill now, and Hobin challenges him again, saying that if he doesn't accept his proposal, it's a sign that Tae-hun is scared of him getting ready and defeat him in combat. And upon hearing this, Tae-hun immediately accepts the boy's challenge, and then, Hobin goes to his friends to inform them about the fight that will take place in a month. And then he goes straight home and access the channel of the foreign YouTuber who teaches martial arts. Then the Birdman asks him to get an old power cable because only then can they start the third lesson where Hobin will learn how to beat a taekwondo fighter as a normal person. But right at the beginning of the class, the Birdman states that it is impossible to beat a taekwondo fighter as a normal person, so the best thing to do is to give up. But as soon as he says that, he fills Hobin with hope again and says that in a street fight, taekwondo is a martial art that is easy to win. In this case, he just needs to make sure that the opponent cannot use his your feet. After all, most taekwondo attacks require them. And to do this, it is necessary to control the environment, taking the fighter to places that make it impossible for him to use his feet freely, such as slippery or narrow places. And then, Hobin decides to fight against Taehyun on a rainy day, and upon deciding this, the boy goes back to his training and starts by reviewing some moves he has already learned, and notices that he will be able to use his calf kick with more freedom than Taehyun's kicks. After all, the calf kick is a more compact kick. And during training, the Birdman throws a bucket of cold water on the boy again, saying that his chances of defeating a taekwondo fighter have only increased by 5%, but he claims that he knows of a move that could increase that percentage to 40. In this case, the blow would be the tackle, a blow that all kicking martial artists hate, and to train this blow, Hobin will need to use the resistance of the water to train his muscles, heart, and stamina in general. And besides, the tackle also needs him to train his core muscles, so Hobin will spend the next month getting stronger, and to strengthen his core muscles, the Birdman says he needs to simply hang on to something. And in the middle of training he is interrupted by Snapper, who then opens a live to continue exploring the viewers. Then Gull notices a trash bag in the corner of the house, and Hobin explains that he was using that to train his abs. Then Snapper says he's crazy. After all, training his abs won't help him beat Snapper. And after the day of the long-awaited fight arrives, Hobin feels confident, as the fight location will be in a narrow alley, and in addition, he chose a rainy day for the fight to take place, which will give him the advantage. However, precisely on that day, the hottest sun in the history of humanity appears, putting an end to his plan, and so Hobin decides to abandon the fight and flee the scene. But soon after, he goes to Taehyun and destabilizes him by throwing water in his face. After that, he throws water everywhere, so Hobin can continue with the fight and his plan. And when he sees himself at an advantage, Hobin attacks his opponent, but Taehyun hits him with a punch, and says that in a real fight, he doesn't need to be limited to using just his feet. And then, Taehyun only uses his hands to beat Hobin, but when he sees an opening, Hobin manages to land his calf kick on him, and explains that he bought those navy sneakers precisely to be able to give more accurate kicks without falling when he's in a place slippery. And even though he's sore all over, Hobin nods to Snapper and says he'll be able to hold out for another 3 minutes so they can put ads in the video. And during the fight against Taehyun, Robin notices that even though the ground is wet, the boy continues to do well with his kicks, and when comparing him with Paco, Robin notices that the two are at completely different levels. After all, he was at least able to get distance with Paco. But in Taehyun's case, he is able to predict his every move, so Robin finally discovers that between a common delinquent like Paco and a professional fighter like Taehyun, there is a lot of difference. And when paying attention to the enemy's feet, he notices that the boy is taking advantage of the sliding floor to get even closer to Robin. And as for internet users, they comment on the fight, saying that Taehyun is a professional, and that's why he doesn't train just your feet. And when he sees no way out, Robin decides to act and hits Taehyun with his calf kick. After all, he can't use the how to get hit without getting hurt technique with Taehyun due to his attacks being very fast. But still, Robin states that the fight isn't over yet, and so he tries to use the calf kick once again, but Taehyun was already smart with that kick and hits him squarely in the face. And meanwhile, Snapper is watching and recording the fight from afar, and notes that it's only a matter of time before Robin is knocked out. In this, the boy attacks again with the same technique as before, and upon noticing Robin directly shouting the names of the attacks, Snapper believes that Robin has some plan in mind. In this case, he is distracting the opponent with his calf kick to then hit him with a direct punch. But instead, Robin distracts him and then surprises him with a tackle blow. In this, he remembers the words of the Birdman when he talked about the importance of applying a right tackle. After all, the good execution of the technique will deprive you of any insecurity. And if the tackle doesn't work, this is a sign that some vital point of the enemy was not hit, so the Birdman suggests that Robin holds and pulls the back of his opponent's knees, as this way he can knock down even bigger people than him. Once that's done, Robin applies a double leg tackle on Taehyun, knocking him to the ground immediately, and upon seeing this scene, Snapper realizes that there is something wrong happening. After all, Taehyun would never fall so easily. And as for the Birdman, he states that the chances of beating his opponent after a well-applied tackle rises to 50%. However, he advises Robin not to end the fight by falling into punch punches with the opponent. After all, he is fighting against a professional fighter. Therefore, the Birdman tells him to place his hand on the opponent's collar and pull it while holding his clothes, and then, he must place his arms on the opponent's neck in the shape of a cross, thus causing Taehan's carotid artery to open. Be pressed. In this, the Birdman presents this technique as cross choke and explains that the opponent will faint within 10 seconds if he continues to apply the pressure that the blow requires. And while he is distracted counting to 10, Taehan alerts the Robin that his legs are not pressing against his opponent's, and then, he notices that the boy is having his first real fight, and when he sees that his cross choke isn't working, Robin starts to despair. In this, he fails in the first commandment he learned in the Birdman's lessons. In this case, he ended up getting excited beyond measure, and as he still doesn't have much combat experience, the right thing is for him to be even calmer and always act in a manner attentive. And then, Robin feels like an idiot for letting himself get so carried away. After all, he had thrown his entire month of training in the trash, just for a momentary distraction. Furthermore, Robin notices that he ended up focusing too much on just executing the move, and this made him forget about basic training. However, Taehan praises him, saying that Robin at least tried, but still, he states that he let Robin knock him down, so he could take this opportunity to steal his sneakers. At this, Robin becomes even more worried. After all, he has been unable to do anything against Taehan this whole time, and when he remembers the advice from his virtual instructor, he remembers that the best thing to do when fighting a Taekwondo fighter is to prevent your opponent from using his legs. And if this is not possible, he advises Robin to run away immediately. After all, if a Taekwondo fighter has his legs free to do what he wants, his kicks will have the same force as a one-ton truck. In this, Taehan looks fixedly at Robin and shows relief at knowing that he will be able to kick his opponent, and meanwhile, Munseong watches his friends fight and already cheers her. She continues to be upset with Robin because he is not answering her questions. Your calls for a long time. In this, Munseong explains that this time the boy is fighting a professional. However, Bomi asks him not to talk about Hobin around her, but Munseong ignores her and says that he managed to land a hit on Taehan, and upon hearing this, she immediately changes her mind and decides to watch the fight. And then, Bomi asks if Hobin won, and Munseong says no, because the boy made a simple mistake at the end of the fight. Having said that, he turns off his cell phone because he wants to deprive Bomi of seeing Hobin taking the biggest beating in the history of humanity, and as for Hobin, he is disappointed when he remembers that his best attacks only worked because Taehan fell for them. Purpose. In this, he starts to question all the effort he made during the last month, and then, his fans ask him not to give up yet, but Hobin states that there is no chance of him beating Taehan. After all, that chance never existed from the beginning. And then, he chooses to apologize to his viewers, and when he sees him about to give up, Snapper once again ignites a flame of motivation in him when talking about the money that Hobin will lose if Taehan beats him, in which he thanks the messages of support from your people. And then, he goes back to reflecting on the lessons that the Birdman taught him, and remembers that the true power of Taekwondo fighters comes only when they use both feet. And second Snapper, Taehan's dominant leg is his right, therefore, Hobin deduces that his opponent will only use his left leg as support to avoid slipping. And then, he plans to take him down again with the tackle, and then finish him with the cross choke, but before reaching him, Taehan stretches his leg towards Hobin with the intention of intimidating him. In this, Hobin remembers that he will only be able to take down a Taekwondo fighter if he stops him from kicking, but in Hobin's case, he ends up receiving a kick to the stomach, which makes his head go completely blank. In this, he forgets what he should do, and as for the Snapper, he shouts from afar, telling him to wake up as soon as possible, and then, Hobin decides to try a direct attack, but ends up receiving several more kicks. And then, Taehan immobilizes Hobin's dominant foot to make him even more cornered, but he claims that he took it easy, so at least the boy's foot isn't broken. That said, he attacks Hobin with a blow that is known for knocking out his opponent, and the blow in question is the back kick. And upon receiving this attack in full, Hobin falls unconscious to the ground, and then, Taehan heads over to Snapper to get their NewTube, as promised. But before he can do anything, Hobin manages to get up, and explains that he trained his body to be able to resist those strong Taekwondo blows. And then, he starts walking towards Taehan, and on the way, he remembers that he must control the environment and take away the fighter's ability to kick. At this, Snapper starts to worry, and says that Hobin could end up dead if he continues with that fight, but Hobin ignores him, and even with his ribs broken, he remembers to ask the people to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. And as for Taehan, he notices that the boy is positioned in a tight booth, just to prevent him from using his kicks, and then, Hobin confirms Taehan's deduction, who in turn, decides to kick Hobin once again, to show that his plan will not work. But upon seeing the kick approaching, Hobin hangs on the metal bar of the door, and then takes the opportunity to knock his opponent to the ground. And once that's done, he decides to apply his final blow to Taehan, in this case, a baseball choke, an attack that consists of pressing your opponent forward while holding the collar of his blouse. And when he sees himself falling for this scam, Taehan is disoriented. After all, he didn't expect anything from Hobin, as he considered him a simple toy, which would only give him a brief diversion to satisfy his thirst for blood. But in the end, that same toy was filling him with helplessness and shame, feelings that Tae-hun loves to make people feel. In this, he remembers that other time when he ended up being defeated in the ring, and when he saw that he was about to go through the same situation, he hits Hobin on the arm, asking for a tap out, which in this case, is the action most humiliating thing a fighter can do in front of viewers. After all, this is the same as admitting defeat. In this, Snapper goes to Hobin and tells him to disarm his attack, as he already won the fight and doesn't need it anymore. However, Hobin continued to pressure him, as he was so focused that he didn't even notice Tae-hun's tap out request. In this, Snapper shouts for Hobin to stop that already, otherwise he will end up killing his opponent. But Hobin still couldn't hear anything. After all, the only voice he heard was that of his master, who warned him about the situation. Importance of making your opponent lose consciousness if you are in a street fight. And after counting to 10, Hobin throws Tae-hun forward as if he were a bag of trash, and then announces his victory to everyone. And as for Tae-hun, he dreams about the defeat he had when facing an MMA fighter, and when he wakes up, the boy finds Snapper and Hobin trying to get him out of there. However, he doesn't take this kindly, and goes after the two, and Hobin explains that he was just worried about leaving him lying there, and in addition, he hands over Tae-hun's watch that had fallen. And then, he just leaves the place, and says that Hobin can continue with his NewTube, and after that, they take the opportunity to make a merch in the middle of the video about an alpha spray, which will make any popular failure, just by using just a squirt of spray. And with that, they end the viral Haida live with a flourish, and pass the raw material from the live to Gul to edit. And while she edits, the girl is worried about seeing how much Hobin got, but in the end, the video gets more than 3 million views, which makes everything much lighter, and in addition, the viral hit channel reaches the milestone 190,000 subscribers. And the next day, Snapper comments to him that the editing made everything much better, and although they are having fun at the moment, this video will still be responsible for causing a lot of headaches to the members of the viral hit. And as for Bomi, she continues following Hobin's steps on the internet, when suddenly, she is surprised by a strange customer who stares at her fixedly while calling her beautiful over and over again, so he tries to attack, asking for her phone number. However, Bomi just takes his request and says he can't do what he's asking. And as for the other employees, they notice that the guy always appears there and does the same thing, even after they have asked him to stop. And then, Bomi remembers that last time, it was Hobin who helped her get away from strange guys like that, and for abandoning him in that incident, she feels guilty. And on another day, the same stalker from before continues his work thinking about Bomi, and wonders how he will manage to have a date with her. In this, the people around are impressed by his strength when carrying the loads, and one of the men introduces him as Manji Hwang, a famous Syrian fighter, which in this case is a traditional Korean style. And as for Hwang, he gets distracted watching Tae-hun's fight against Hobin, and is impressed to see that Tae-hun was defeated, and besides, Hwang notices that the viral hit channel is very famous, so he believes he can make his channel boom also, if you defeat Hobin. And meanwhile, Jixi goes back to talking about the video of Hobin's fight against Tae-hun, and states that the edits made the video much better, and Hobin notices that the views keep growing. However, Jixi asks if the boy is really okay. After all, he took a huge beating from his last opponent, and Hobin, in turn, explains that even though he is a professional victim of bullying, Tae-hun is still a bully very different from the others. Too much. In this case, he believes that the boy may not be as bad as they thought. And upon hearing this, Jixi tells him to stop being so nice. However, Hobin continues to hit that button, because he saw something different in Tae-hun's expressions, which made him feel that they will still meet at some point. In this, Jixi says that it is very unexpected to see his friend thinking that way, and then, Hobin asks how his opponent was after the fight. And Jixi informs that everyone on the internet was amazed by Tae-hun's beauty, even though he was unconscious on the floor. Therefore, he believes that the boy would be a success if he tried a career in NewTube. And suddenly, Hobin decides to take back what he had said about Tae-hun, and reaffirms that the boy is a terrible guy. And meanwhile, Gul makes some notes in her notebook, referring to postures that she should adopt, so as not to be read by the others like a boomer ant. However, a group of teenagers decide to play a prank on her, scaring Gul with a random toy, in which she reacts hilariously in the eyes of the students, who reaffirm that she continues to behave like an ant, even though she tries hard to look more like a teenager. And in addition, another student with a cell phone in his hand, says that he managed to record the entire scene, and then she tries to take the boy's cell phone to delete the video, but he simply raises his hand in the air, preventing her from being able to reach your device. However, he soon realizes that that video won't get as many views, so he decides to delete the video on his own. And as for the other girl in the room, she advises her friend not to tease Gul so much, otherwise, the Hobin may end up appearing. However, she and the others say this with the same mocking tone as before, and in addition, they disdain that move that the boy uses so much, called how to get hit without getting hurt. And then, Gul decides to show in practice that the move works, but when she punches one of the boys, her hand starts to swell, which makes her the target of even more bullying. So, the girls go to her and advise Gul to learn to speak from scratch, so that she can express herself in a normal way and people like her. And then, she claims that she is trying to improve, but she never manages manages to evolve her ward no matter how hard she tries. That being said, Gul starts crying, and the girl next door asks her to stop it because this way, Gul makes them look like movie villains, when in fact they are just making fun of her. And in the midst of that confusion, Jixi goes to the place to defend his friend. However, he only counts on his authority as he is a veteran, but this obviously doesn't do any good, as the students beat him up even though he is in a year more advanced. In this, Gul goes to Jixi to protect him, and tells the students that they should respect their elders, and as for Jixi, he feels like shit for getting beaten up in front of the girl he likes. In this, the other students treat him with disdain, as they demonstrate that they were not even remembering his name, and then, the other student says that that veteran's name is Jixi, and soon begins to make fun of his name. In this, the boy who was recording Gul decides to attack her again, claiming that the whole mess started because of her, but before his hand could touch her, Hobin appears just in time, and stops him from attacking her. There. And then, the boy continues with the mockery, calling Hobin short, who in turn, feels in danger. After all, the boys really are much taller than him. And then, Hobin wonders what he will do in the face of that situation, and decides to assert his voice against the gang, showing that he is angry with the fact that they had beaten his friend. In this, the student claims that Jixi did something worthy of a beating, and that's why he ended up getting the worst of it, and then they go back to ragging on Hobin, saying that he only won the fight against Taehyun because it was all staged. After all, I would never have the ability to actually do that. And as a way to get this story straight, one of the boys who also has a channel asks to fight against Hobin by betting his channels, and upon hearing this, Hobin notes that he ended up leaving the students convinced that he would be an easy target, and remembering that they are nothing compared to Taehyun, he decides to sound more threatening, just like Taehyun. And then, he asks the student to give him 100 yen, and the group notices his attempt to imitate Taehyun, and they start making fun of him, saying that this way of acting doesn't work for him. And then, Hobin and the boy start to attack, when suddenly, Munseong appears just in time, preventing the fight from continuing. And after that, Hobin notes that things would have been much easier if he had asked Munseong to accompany him from the beginning, and as for Gul, she says she is happy that this mess didn't end in a fight, since Munseong didn't attack anyone this time. After all, the boy only resorts to violence when it actually suits him. But upon hearing this, Jixi reminds her that she suffers a lot in her room, but Gul sees her oppressors as just immature people. In this, Jixi remembers when they said about having a channel on NewTube, and asks what kind of content they produce. And she explains that they have a channel called Comedy Group, whose objective is to play pranks on people on the street. And then, Jixi gets up abruptly, and complains to Hobin because instead of him defending Gul, he just stayed shrinking in fear. Hobin reminds him that the only thing he did was get beaten, so they are not above each other in this story. And on another day, Hobin dreams about Munseong, and while they talk in the dream, he asks Hobin to contact Bomi, because even though it's difficult for him, she doesn't deserve to go through that situation. In this, he turns his back, and states that it won't be easy to face her after she saw that shameful scene he was subjected to. And meanwhile, Gul remembers the moment she was protected by Hobin, and this leaves her completely excited to the point of sending him messages, even without having any topic in mind. And as for Bomi, she follows her work normally, when out of nowhere, Huang appears at the establishment once again, and when he leaves, she is relieved, as she feels a certain fear when she sees how he looks at her. And when she remembers that her shift will last until late at night, Bomi becomes even more worried. After all, Huang could end up staying outside waiting to leave. So, Hobin goes there to ask for a strawberry parfait, but Bomi informs him that this product has already run out, and then leaves the place, slamming everything, showing that she is furious with him. And then, she hands him some parfait to make Hobin leave as soon as possible, in that, he understands how she feels. After all, he didn't get in touch for 2 long months, and although he had his reasons for if he acted like that, Bomi would have no way of knowing what was going on in his head anyway. And then, he decides to leave to avoid causing more confusion, but first, Hobin notices that he will need to eat the parfait since he just made that order. And as for Bomi, she takes a closer look at his hands, and reads some ready-made sentences that he left ready to speak to her, and then, the girl laughs lightly and tries to cover it with a cough. However, Hobin claims that she was actually laughing, but Bomi continues to deny this, and asks him to leave as she needs to continue her work. But, the boy explains that there is no one in line to be served, so he continues to interact with her, asking how she has been. But instead of talking about her, Bomi turns the topic back to him, and says that she found out about him hiring an editor for the channel. However, she says this with a certain tone of jealousy, since the person he hired is a girl. And upon seeing this expression on her face, Hobin notices that the girl can be even scarier than Taehyun himself when she's upset about something, and so, Hobin pays attention to his words so as not to irritate her even more, and explains that the girl in question is a first-year student called Gul. In this, Bomi asks if he thinks the girl is pretty, and then Gul herself appears there, and Hobin, in turn, confirms that she is indeed very pretty, in addition to being a popular girl at school. Said Iaso, he asks if she went there to see him, and Gul says she just wants to hear his opinion about a popular song she wrote. And as for Bomi, she is amazed by Gul's beauty, who in turn, gives her a gift, and says that she is doing this in Hobin's name, because even though the boy doesn't stop talking about her, he still doesn't he's capable incapable of apologizing properly if he doesn't have a little help. At that, Hobin gets all red and asks her to stop it, and then, Gold deduces that he was lying when he said he would like to talk to Bomi. However, he claims that this was not a lie, and upon hearing this, Bomi asks him to call her, and as for Gold, she decides to leave the place, as she has already fulfilled her duty there. And the next day, Bomi walks down the street distracted while talking to Hobin, when she suddenly gets scared when she sees a snake in her bag, but soon after, she is surprised by those 3 students from before, who were just recording a prank on her. In this, they ask Bomi's permission to post the video of her reaction, but before she can respond, they come forward and say that they will put her part in the video anyway. Then, an out-of-control car starts to come towards her. And this was another video. If you liked it and want more videos like this, subscribe, leave your like, and see you next time.